Oh, you're waiting. Oh, so this whole conversation has been a failed attempt at a cold open.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
I don't just like talk to you like normally. Not
Yeah.
anymore. Even the casual pre-show conversation we have now is now content.
Okay.
Um,
Sorry.
because the algorithm demands cold opens. Um, hey, is that true? I mean, I know like we both collectively, independently of each other, decided that hey, we should have cold opens on our show now. Because we saw other shows do that. Is that
I,
is it good? Hello and welcome to Flanagan's Wake, a Doof Media podcast watching, analyzing, and discussing the collective works of Mike Flanagan. My name is Scott Daly, and I am your host. And joining me, as always, is that creepy masked man standing behind me, watching me work on my novel. It's Matt Freeman. How's it going back there, Matt?
it's good. Yeah, it's going good.
I thought you were doing like a no dialogue joke thing, and I don't think that's going to work in a podcast, Matt.
Oh, it worked.
Oh.
Unless you have one of those podcast apps that cuts out silences, then it didn't work.
I had to turn that off in mine because, damn it, the timing is important. It's key to the jokes in your funny podcasts. Don't turn that feature on in your podcast app. It's bad.
That's right. If you don't think that Scott and I are funny, it's because you have the no silences clipped out. That's why.
Bingo. Thank you. Love it. All right. This week on the show, we are taking a look at our third Mike Flanagan film. This is going to be the first of the 3 films that Mike Flanagan will release in 2016. We're going to be looking at Hush. This, Matt, I think is going to be quite fun. I'm going to enjoy talking to you about this one a whole lot, actually.
Yeah, me too.
All right, so I don't think we have any announcements or anything this week, so let's just jump right into it. Let's talk all about Hush. Matt, what is this movie about?
A deaf and mute writer who retreated into the woods to live a solitary life must fight for her life in silence when a masked killer appears at her window.
You know, we've done 3 shows now. Our first one, the little summary for Absentia, was written by Mike Flanagan. I think it was like the summary he put in the Kickstarter. The second one for Oculus, we chose to use IMDb. And I don't think we commented on that episode. I really didn't think the IMDb summary for Oculus was very good. But this one, I think is pretty good. I think and I think it's because it's a rather simple story in its conception, right? Like this isn't too complicated of a movie conceptually, I think.
Yeah, it's doing one thing, it's doing it efficiently.
Yep. This movie was written by Mike Flanagan, of course, and his wife, Kate Siegel. It is directed by Flanagan. It stars Kate Siegel, John Gallagher Jr., and a couple more Flanagan semi-regulars that we'll see, Matt. We'll see Michael Trucco, who plays John. We'll see him a couple more times, I believe, Midnight Mass, and one other thing, I can't remember what else. And Samantha Sloyan, I think that's how you pronounce her last name. I should have checked that before we started, who we will also see a couple more times in Midnight Mass and Fall of the House of Usher. So we're just slowly kind of gathering our Flanagan team here, Matt, as we go.
That's so fun. I'm excited about this part. It's like we're collecting Pokemon.
They're people, Matt. They're humans.
Right. I know.
This movie had a budget of $1 million. That's just an estimated amount. We don't have any firm numbers. All these budget numbers, by the way, are estimated. If you go to IMDb or Box Office Mojo and look at budgets, I would say 90% of the time it's just a semi-educated guess. We don't actually know. Accounting for films is very, very complicated. We don't have any box office receipts because this was a film that was released directly onto Netflix in 2016. So they, of course, don't share any of their numbers or anything. So we don't have anything there. I think this movie probably did okay. I mean, Netflix continued to work with Mike Flanagan for years after this, right? Like all his major shows until now essentially were released on Netflix. He's parted ways with them since, but they had a very, very long and fruitful relationship. So,
and it's a strong premise. I mean, I think one thing about Netflix shows is you decide whether you're going to watch the show based on how compelling the the hook of the premise sounds to you.
Sure.
And this is one I think that, part of the reason why it lends itself so much to a simple one sentence summary is like, yeah, it's story wise, it's designed to be this compelling hook where you're just like, oh yeah, how does that play out? Like I like, it's one of those premises, much like a lot of Stephen King premises, where you immediately start imagining it as soon as you hear the premise,
Hmm.
and then that fills you with this compulsion to find out, like, well, how does it go then? How does it? I need to know now. I need to know.
Yeah. No, I think you're totally right there. So overall, what did you think about Hush?
I enjoyed it. So slasher movies are not typically my thing, but I liked how the movie was composed, how everything was paced. It played with the tropes enough to keep you interested while not being meta. And what I mean by played with the tropes is like it knows the tropes of the slasher genre enough to like stick within the structure while sometimes misleading you,
Hmm.
which keeps it lively. I this was like a lot of it was kind of painful to watch. It's funny. So okay, just a thought here. It's funny because I often say I don't like scary movies. Okay,
Uh-huh. You do say
uh,
that quite a bit.
I never say that I don't like gory movies, but Mike Flanagan has a way of doing gore that is disturbing, actually. Even to me, someone who doesn't mind gore in the vast majority of circumstances. I just think that's an interesting note, and so I mentioned that because a lot of the like slasher gore and people pulling arrows out of their legs and stuff I found very upsetting.
Uh,
Anyway,
Yeah, no, totally. And I want to circle back to a conversation we had last week about how Mike Flanagan doesn't like gore about hand stuff. And
uh
I
huh,
just have to say, when I said that, I forgot. I had seen this movie before. I had forgotten about the scene in which our main character gets her hand horribly mutilated by a bad man.
uh
And
huh,
I just have to say, Mr. Flanagan, you are a liar.
uh huh.
You clearly love destroying hands. You clearly enjoy it. This is another movie. We're adding it to the long list. We will continue. Like we need to have a Mike Flanagan destroys hands count. Um, just like going throughout this
Uh-huh.
entire show. Maybe on the video we'll pop something up
Yeah.
right now that says our number is at 2 now. Two hands have been destroyed.
Yeah. I don't think any hands were destroyed in Absentia, but
I was trying to
maybe.
think. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I think it's at 2. Yeah, I think you're
Yeah,
right.
we're at 2, but my gosh, the hand gore in this is pretty rough. And yeah, no, this is a rough movie. I really enjoyed this one. I think it's a lot of fun. Obviously, like it's I guess we can call it a gimmick movie, right? Because the gimmick here is it's a home invasion movie, except the victim happens to be deaf and mute. Which as you said, Matt, I think is a very fun concept, right? It's just like you hear that and you're like, oh well, let's think of all the ways that would make the typical home invasion thing a little bit different, a little bit more complicated. And I do think
Mhm.
Flanagan and Kate Siegel, the other writer, managed to use that to its fullest extent. I think this is by the way, I think a movie that sometimes we just talk about like simple but like very effective writing, and this is a movie that I just think has all that. Like this is like like if you break writing down, if you break storytelling down, really what it is at its most simple is setup and payoff, right? That's what
Mhm.
it is. It's setting something up and paying it off. And I think that's one of the things this movie does so well is that every bit, every beat is set up in some way. And Flanagan with his camera does a really good job of allowing you to clock things, or at least telling you it's like, hey, I'm going to linger on that corkscrew just a beat longer than you would think I normally would. And so you might not in the moment be thinking, bet she's going to stab a dude in the neck with that corkscrew. But you will think, I am going to remember the corkscrew. Same thing when the one girl puts her phone in her back pocket. And that is this movie too, like just constant every bit during the first act is something being put into place or something being set up or something being defined in some way that pays off at the end of the movie. And that as a viewer, like on top of just having fun with the tension and the thrill of it all, like getting to see those things pay off is just satisfying. It's
Yeah,
fun to watch, and I think that's one thing this movie does very, very well.
totally. My favorite one of those was the smoke alarm,
Hmm.
where I like I kind of felt like, oh, I'm smart. I figured out that she's, the smoke alarm is going to come into play, and then you think about it, and you're like, okay, obviously that's super well set up. Not only is it set up, but the camera keeps making sure that the smoke alarm is in the frame.
Yep.
Usually they're just like at the corner, not quite doing the thing where it like knowingly lingers on the smoke alarm,
Yeah.
but it's making like every time it kind of follows her go through the kitchen, it's the smoke alarm is in the shot somewhere.
Yeah, yeah, and it's like I think there's this fun game you can play in filmmaking sometimes where like you obviously constantly want to be surprising people, right? Like people generally like surprise in movies. It's fun, it's exciting, but the other part of that is people like predicting things, and people like there's that moment where people like feeling they have a leg up on the movie. Like I think actually this is kind of textually quoted in this movie, right? When Maddie is talking to Sarah, and Sarah's like, I usually like try to figure out what the ending's going to be, but this one really stumped me. And so you're always kind of just trying to play this game of I want them to feel surprised, but I also want them to kind of feel like they have a grasp on what's going on. And I feel like this is a movie that like loves playing with that line of like of setting something up to where a person knows. We talked about this last week with Oculus too, with the apple and the light bulb, right? That
mm,
wonderful, disgusting moment of the apple and the light bulb, where Flanagan fully knew that the second she put that apple down next to that light bulb, every person in the audience was going to instantly make that connection and know what was going to happen. And yet, we still love to see it pay off. Even if it's
mhm.
exactly what we thought was going to happen, just seeing it pay off that way is so satisfying. And that is what I think this movie does. There's multiple moments I think where people will say, "Oh, I bet I know what she's about to do with that. I bet I know how she's going to use that, etc., etc." And it pays off really well.
Yeah. Once again, I think it's a really interesting pattern. Not something I had really thought about as being a Flanaganism. Is the characters being just a little bit trope aware.
Hmm.
I think Absentia, the main character, is like, hey, I think that this is a fairy tale monster, and then kind of tries to play into that, and it doesn't work out for her at all.
Hmm.
And then Oculus, hey, we're in a ghost story with an evil mirror, so I'm going to trap it. I'm going to outflank it. Doesn't work out well for her at all. Finally, works out well for someone to be a little bit trope aware and
Yeah.
to think one step ahead. Which, by the way, I did love the um this. I guess it's all confined to the one sequence where the film doesn't announce to us this is what's happening, but she imagines herself running out of the door and then getting chased down and getting your head bashed in.
Hmm.
And then as soon as that happened, I think I was like, I don't think that was real. and
Yeah.
then the film shows us that was just in her head, and then we see her thinking through the permutations, and we see essentially her standing outside herself talking. It's the only time the character quote unquote talks is this imagined version of herself talking through the situation. And really what the character's voice is doing is what the viewer's voice is doing in their
Yeah.
own head, because they're like, well, how's she gonna, because that's part of the fun, like you just said. It's a problem solving exercise. You're trying to think what, it's almost like you think you're helping, like, oh no,
Yeah.
she could do this, uh that's what I think, that's what can make this genre really fun, is you're kind of racing the character to figure out how to get out of the situation.
Yeah.
um
Yeah. And again, this was all set up, right? This is her writer brain that she describes to Sarah. This is something we also see in as she's trying to work through the 7 endings she has for her novel, that she's able to see all these possible permutations and endings, but she cannot pick one. She cannot pick an ending. And so if this the kind of a culmination for her character is this moment where she decides on an ending. She picks an ending that she's going to
mhm.
kill him. Um, I think you're right. It's great. This movie has a good ending. I think this is one of those movies that needed to end semi good. I guess if you're Sarah and John, not a
Mhm.
great ending. But for Maddie, great ending, because she survives. But like I really I think it is kind of not surprising, but maybe this is just you and me because we've been through this process of like, what were we expecting coming into this movie? Like I had seen this movie before I knew this ending, but I am curious from your perspective, like, did you go into this movie expecting, oh, this is going to end bad again? She's going to die. Um, this is how Flanagan likes to end these type of movies.
Yeah, I would say I was more than open to the possibility. Like it wasn't clear to me immediately that this was going to be a quote unquote home invasion movie, of the same ilk as like Panic Room or something, where it's like,
Hmm.
well, of course she's gonna live. That was not where I started out from, and also because it's so brutal in terms of killing her friend and her friend's boyfriend in just horrible ways. I was like, I don't know, man. This is pretty downer. I mean, like, yeah, she lives, but like two characters who you like do die horribly.
Yeah,
So I'm not saying it's a fully downer ending, certainly, because she does kill the bad guy,
yeah,
but it's also not weightless in the sense of like, oh well, they only killed the characters I didn't care about, right? Which is, I think,
yeah,
something that very often slasher movies do is they kill the characters you don't care about, so you're not mad at the movie,
yeah. You have a large cast of characters and basically killer fodder. Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm guessing you've never saw the 2008 film The Strangers. This is a pretty knowledgeable guess, but
Um, I think I actually might have,
whoa,
but
okay.
maybe I might be thinking about something else. I went to see a horrible slasher movie with a guy named Scott Daly when I was in college, and it seems like it might have been that one, but I'm not actually sure of that. So
It was 2008, so it was
okay,
May 2008. So I was just about to graduate from college, if not already. So it might have been the summer that I was still in school. I hadn't left yet, so I very well could have been. I can't believe I would have taken you to see this movie, and B, you would have come to see this movie with me. So I'm not fully convinced of this, but sure.
in
Yeah, I
any
mean,
case,
the point is that this is a genre that like it has tropes. It is a genre that there are many movies. I think I bring up The Strangers because I think it's a really really good example of this type of movie done very well. Um, and so is Hush, by the way. But
mhm.
but I mean, you are right that I think one remarkable thing about this movie to me is this movie, Matt, is 81 minutes long
Yeah.
from and I mean 81 minutes long from the first moment to the end of the credits, right?
Mm,
Like this is a movie that does not overstay its welcome, that knows exactly what it wants to do. It does it and then it gets out, which is great. We like short movies. We think movies in general have probably gotten a little too long. Although like a good movie is as long as it needs to be, right? If it's a good
mm,
movie, doesn't matter how long it is. But one of the things I think is so remarkable in this 81-minute well-oiled machine is how long Flanagan still takes to establish the characters.
mhm,
Because we do spend a lot of time. Like this we've talked about the simplicity of this movie. This is simple plot. It's a deaf mute woman who's living by herself. A stranger walks up and is trying to kill her, and it's the cat and mouse game between the two of them over the course of this film. You didn't have to spend as much time defining who this woman is. Didn't have to, but he
mm,
did. He did. And it's one of the reasons why the movie works so well on me. And you're absolutely right. Like, not only do we define him, we define Maddie or Sarah, the neighbor, who I really like. I really liked her. We got basically one scene with her. And I was like, this chick is awesome. And I am very sad that she's about to die horribly. Um, and not only that, but Sarah's friendliness and greatness kind of reflects on Maddie in an interesting way. Like this is the thing I really like about this movie, Matt, is that it's very simple premise. Yes. Very simple story. Yes. But like there's actually like a lot going on here in this character. Like a surprising amount going on with this character
mhm.
that I can't wait to kind of dig in with you on.
Oh yeah, for sure. I agree with you, by the way, about the neighbor Sarah being someone who, like, I very quickly was like, oh, she's so generous and sweet, and she's just a good person, and then you have to watch her be horribly murdered in a fairly graphic and disgusting way. And then
Yeah.
I mean, it's definitely like a shoot the dog moment where I'm just like, oh, I hate this guy. I can't
Yeah.
wait. Like basically at that point, you're actually like, if this movie doesn't involve this guy getting horribly defeated, then I'm going to be really mad, right? Like that's
Yeah.
kind of the setup, I think, actually.
Yeah.
Um,
I think she's a great character and like great functionally also to like help set up who Maddie is, because I think so. We meet this girl. We learn she at the age of 13 got very sick. Resulted in her having hearing loss and temporary inability to speak. I think it's the midnight mass little author blurb that we learn a lot of the details of this from. By the way, we'll get into the midnight mass bit
mhm.
in a little bit here, but basically botched surgery made her hearing loss and her muteness permanent. And so she's kind of, we learn she's isolated herself from the world, and it's I think it's really clever the way this movie doesn't fill in all the blanks of this. So we know that she used to live in the city. She left the city. She was dating a man named Craig. Matt. That's Matt's first name, by the way, is Craig. So,
Yeah.
thank you, Matt, for breaking up and breaking poor Maddie's heart. But
I'm sorry,
so
Maddie.
she was dating this guy. It ended poorly. She moves out into the middle of nowhere to kind of isolate herself. And I love the conversation with her sister is really interesting, because her sister says, "Why are you isolating yourself?" And her response is, "Look, isolation happened to me. I didn't pick it." Right.
Mhm.
And that I think is an interesting point of view on who she is. But one of the things that I think the movie so cleverly does is it constantly does show people trying to reach out to her. Like it has her sister reach out to her. Craig is trying to reach out to her again. There's also like when she goes to answer the original text from Sarah at the very beginning of the movie, we do get to see very briefly like a list of iMessages that she has from friends. There's like a lot of people like reaching out to her saying, "Hey, I read the book. I loved it. Hey, I miss you. Like I'm heading into the city next month and you're not going to be there. I miss you." It's like there's all these people, and all those texts I'm presuming have gone unanswered.
Right.
She hasn't responded to them. And I think that's why Sarah is also this perfect character in this thing, because Maddie is this woman who feels like the world has isolated her, whether it's through her disability or just whatever happened with Craig or what have you. The world has isolated her. She's alone, not by choice, but because she has to be, and that she has all these people that want to interact with her. Sarah is this perfect example. She's a neighbor, right? They live in the middle of nowhere and she's a neighbor. She's saved in Maddie's phone as Sarah next door.
Mhm.
um, and she clearly wants a really a close friendship with this woman. She cares for her. Like her and her husband are taking sign language courses in their
Mhm.
spare time just to be able to communicate better with her.
Mhm.
Um, and Maddie's reception to a lot of this is like, not like super like hell yeah jazzed. Like I actually think her being in the phone saved to Sarah next door is maybe a fun way to demonstrate this. Is like I had I put her in my phone as that to remember who she was, and I've like never gone and fixed that. And now this, she's not Sarah next door. She's Sarah taking American Sign Language courses so she can better communicate with me. Like I think that's a really good indicator. There's also like this idea that like Sarah comes over to Maddie's house a lot. We don't really see any. We see like Sarah asking Maddie to come back to her place, and she never really does it. I like the moment where uh, they have the Wi-Fi, like the power's cut, and the only Wi-Fi in the area is John and Sarah's, and she tries to get into it, and they realize she needs a password. It's like, oh well, maybe if you visited more often, you would have their Wi-Fi password.
Uh-huh.
So all this to be said, Matt. I'm sorry I've been talking for so long. I'll let you talk, but I've really just loved the creation of this character as this woman who feels like she's been isolated from the world, but she's also kind of intentionally isolating herself. She's doing this to herself while feeling it's being done to her. And I think part of that is her transformation over the course of this movie from a passive character to an active character, from someone that the world is doing things to me to switching to, I'm going to do this. I'm going to stake my claim. I'm going to decide. I'm going to pick my ending. My ending's not going to get picked for me.
Yeah, I think everything you said there is spot on. I was also thinking along the lines of, she's embraced being isolated,
Mm-hmm.
and I, it might be too strong to say that she's pushing people away, but then again, it might not be because she does. repeatedly refused to answer the calls from Craig. And but like, and part of it is like she seems to think that like the answer is going to be shutting out the world,
Mm-hmm.
and then the world crashes into her life, right? That this, despite the fact that she has tried to live this life where she just kind of recuses herself from the world, this murderer finds her, of all people, right?
Mm-hmm.
um and like, I don't know, that there's something interesting there too. I don't know if I'm going to nail this exactly, but like a guy with a crossbow prowling around a bunch of isolated houses, kind of in the wilderness almost. He had a bunch of hack marks on his crossbow suggesting he'd already killed a bunch of people. It's like this guy is specifically picking off people who are living relatively isolated lives.
Mm-hmm.
Is the
Yeah.
sense that I got. Like he's not doing this in the city. He's got a crossbow, which is a weapon you use for hunting people out in the open. And again, this is all subtext. So like we don't know anything about this guy. I think that's interesting. Just as an aside, the fact that there's no scene where we find out like who this guy is. How does he know Maddie? What's his deal? It doesn't matter. Yeah. He's crazy. He wants to murder people.
Yeah, I think one of the things that the movie does very early on is the camera kind of swoops by a series of novels on the shelf. Several of them are Stephen King novels, but the one we get the most clear, visible sign on is Mr. Mercedes, a book that you and I read for Kingslingers, in which the villain Brady Hartsfeld, that's not a spoiler, by the way, the book tells you who the bad guy in that is just kind of a monster, and he just kills people because he likes it. And I think that is something that was an intentional like prop placement to be like, that's this guy, right? Like he just does it because he wants to and because it's fun and he enjoys it, and that's it. We don't learn anything else. We learn a lot more about Brady Hartsfeld and Mr. Mercedes, but we don't learn about anything about this guy. He's not even named, right? He's just the man.
No, man, it's so funny. I hadn't consciously made that connection, but he does seem extremely Brady Hartsfeld-esque.
Yeah, he does, doesn't he? Yeah.
It just like, so Brady Hartsfeld doesn't use a crossbow, but like it doesn't seem like ridiculous, the idea that like this sort of like being over prepared and yet also managing to screw up. It's classic.
Yeah, gosh, I want to spend so much time talking about the man. Maybe we'll get to that in a bit, but you're totally right. And there's so much going on with this guy. There's so much going on with it. It's fascinating. Sorry, go ahead.
No, just I don't know if I quite got to where I was heading with the idea of she's trying to isolate herself, but then the world kind of refuses to let her isolate herself. For better or worse, right? Like you said, she's got people reaching out to her, but then also the darkness of the world reaches out to her.
Yeah,
and I think maybe part of it is realizing like you can't just leave. Like you're gonna have to be active in the world again, one way or the other.
Yep.
Yeah.
Despite what happens to you, despite the things that go wrong in your life, you can't run away from it ultimately, because it'll find you. Yeah. Do you want to just jump into the man now? I mean, there's a lot. I want to go back to Maddie and both Sarah a little bit later, but I do think so. First of all, the casting here. So I don't know if you knew John Gallagher Jr. that plays him from anything, but like in the things I've seen him in, so he was in 10 Cloverfield Lane. I think he played one of the other kidnappees down there, but he like typically in the things he's in, well, he doesn't play psycho killers. Like he plays kind of like I'm trying to think of a nice way to say this, but like kind of like the dorky, like kid you don't take as seriously. Maybe he's very, very smart, but he's got like a very specific kind of chip on his shoulder. I mean, like Brady Hartsfeld is such a perfect comparison because like that's the type of maybe take the serial killer part out of it, but that's a type of character he plays, right? And it's such a great choice to cast him as this killer, right? It could have been totally different. But we have this moment in the movie where he takes off the mask for the first time. He takes off the mask for the first time, and I don't know what I was expecting. The mask, by the way, is just, it's not like anything really. It's a very plain mask. It's not very intimidating on its own. And I saw a lot of reviews of this movie were like, this movie went downhill the second the guy took the mask off, and it's just a guy. And I'm like, no, but that's like the point, right? Like, like he takes off the mask, and it's just John Gallagher Jr. And the first time he takes off the mask, Gallagher does this thing where his mouth is like open for a lot of it. Like that whole sequence at the beginning, even when he's talking to her and saying like, "Can you read lips?" He's doing it like with his mouth slightly ajar the entire time, and it just makes him look kind of dumb. And like, I mean, dumb is the perfect expression. Like it just makes him look kind of stupid. And it is this really, really fascinating moment. I mean, I love that whole moment. Like I love, she writes on the window in the lipstick. And it's this like won't tell, didn't see your face, boyfriend coming home. It's like completely just acquiescing to him and just begging him to leave her alone. And then his response is to take off his mask, be like, "Well, you've seen my face now, huh?" And it's like supposed to be like, I'm not saying he's not an intimidating presence in the movie, because I think he is, because he's a man with a weapon that's trying to murder her. That's I'm not saying that, but like he becomes so much more complicated than that because of who you cast as it, how John Gallagher Jr. like holds himself, how he's just open mouth breathing so much of the time, and then his interactions with the big football player John a little bit later are just like perfect. Like Brady Hartsfield, yes, but maybe even from The Stand. God, why am I blanking on his name?
Hawk. I know who you're talking about.
Harold Lauder. There we go.
Lauder, yeah.
I got there. Just like you get the feeling that this is like a frustrated, like maybe involuntary celibate kid, like working out his frustrations on the world. Because I mean, he does kill. I mean, we do see him kill a man, but like we also see him target Sarah specifically, and then target Maddie specifically. So maybe he is specifically killing women, and the murder of John is out of convenience. I think you could also argue that because like he's like oh, a guy your size, I would not stand a chance, and it's very clear to me that the man picks targets that he feels he would have the advantage over. He would never get himself in a situation where he doesn't have a leg up on the person. So
yeah. I think I would just agree with like everything you're saying. Like so, you know, the idea of having this white mask kind of reminds you of The Shape. You know, kind of reminds you of Scream a little bit. But just like to cut the line between those two things, like The Shape is a supernatural creature, and is terrifying, and like you're not meant to be like, oh, he's actually an idiot, but that's exactly the impression you're supposed to have from Scream, where that's a movie that starts out with the scary, intimidating antagonist and ends with "you cut too deep, man," which is like it's like revealing the underlying stupidity and sort of banality of evil. Underlying that the type of person who would do that kind of thing. And I think this is absolutely a banality of evil villain, where he actually sucks. He's a loser who gets his jollies murdering people who are weaker than him, and the having the white mask and then taking the mask off, it's like, yeah, that's the impression you're supposed to get. I'm sure.
Yeah. It's great, and it again takes something that could have been simple. Like we still don't learn anything about him, but like the movie allows us to build this kind of sketch of who he is as a person, and that's what I think elevates it from just another home invasion slasher film, as you said, to something that's a little bit more. And the way they play off each other perfectly. Also, by the way, you talked about the crossbow and how he's marked his victims on the crossbow. We know he's a psychopath because he's doing Roman numerals, and he does 2 sets of 5, and then he does 1 scratch on the left of the 2 sets of 5 and 2 scratches on the right of the 2 sets of 5. And I'm like, dude, that's not how you do Roman numerals, you crazy person.
Is that or just the hatches or whatever it is?
Yeah. So not Roman numerals. Sorry. Yes. Thank you. But the point is he's insane, and that's when I knew it wasn't the murders and the everything else. It was just when he was making weird scratches into his crossbow that didn't line up with how you would actually do it.
Just willy-nilly, yeah. Yeah, the crossbow is also a huge source of tension because you're like, cock the crossbow.
Well, but she doesn't know how to do it, right? I mean, that's
Yeah.
like the average person has no idea how to correctly set a crossbow, and it is hard, right? Like even he struggles with it a little bit.
Yeah. Well, and also her hand is mangled on top of it.
Yeah,
So
no,
even if she were strong
that's
enough,
very true.
actually,
but just the fact that she got the crossbow is like so great because
Yeah.
to your he's a fucking idiot thing. Like
Yeah.
I like to read reviews of these movies from people, both like just critics and from just regular watchers, because I'm just curious like what people's reaction to stuff are. I'm always kind of curious why people like things and why people don't like things. And one of the things was like these two people just are stupid. Like they just, it's supposed to be this cat and mouse game, but they each keep making mistakes. And it's like, well, yeah, but I think that's like the point, right? Where like
Yeah.
he is consistently underestimating her. He finds this fascinating and a fun game because he learns that she's deaf, and he makes assumptions based off the fact that she's deaf, which is, I can just fuck with this woman. I can just fuck with her the whole time. I'm never going to be in any danger. I'm going to take my time, and I'm going to like he's done this 13 times. He really likes doing this, but tonight is going to be like the apex for him. This is going to be the best moment because I am fully in control, and he's not, because he sucks. He shoots a crossbow at her. She dodges it. He decides to climb up the lattice and just throw his crossbow on top. And so she just grabs it.
Yeah.
And hits him. And it's like, he's an idiot. Like that's part of like, and it's not to, I think the thing that works about this movie for me is that just because he's an idiot, it doesn't diminish the fact that he's a threat, because he does have an advantage on her, right? Because this is part of why the concept is so cool, because you think, oh, she's deaf. She doesn't know when he's sneaking up on her. She doesn't know also how much noise she's making. If she's trying to sneak and hide, is my breathing too loud? Am I making too much noise? When she's stepping along that gutter on the outside of the roof, like she can't hear if she's making a lot of noise with that or not. And like, that's such a fun idea. And it allows this movie to live in this world where he is kind of an idiot, but also kind of in control most of the movie still.
Yeah. It causes you to use more creative parts of your mind than I think you normally would for a movie like this, because like part of me toward the beginning of the movie was thinking like, well, you could just sort of hide in the house, and then if he comes in and tries to find you, then you could kind of set an ambush for him, maybe get the drop on him. You know the house better than he does. And then you think about it and you're like, well, first of all, like that's a little overconfident, but on top of that, if you can't hear where he is in the house, you can't do any of that. Like, if you're waiting until he's in line of sight before you start contemplating the ambush, it's too late. He can already he's right there. And also you can't really hide from him because he'll just find you. So yeah, it was really interesting how it causes you to realize there's whole classes of strategies of how to deal with situations that are just not practical when you can't hear. That's not stuff I ever really thought about at all.
Yeah, and I think the movie does a great job of kind of systematically eliminating options for her, right? Like she tries to sneak out the door and run out into the woods. He immediately finds her. She tries to climb the roof and sneak out that way. He finds her that way too. Like she tries distraction techniques. None of it's working. So like to me, there was never a moment where I was like, why doesn't she just do this? Because I feel like the movie is primarily her trying to do this and this continually not working. And each time she gets a little more hurt. Each time she comes out of it scathed. And things just kind of escalate from there. And so like, again, from a structural and just writing perspective, I think a lot of the story is just very, very tight. It's not complicated. It's not having to do a lot, but it's very, very tight in its construction.
Yeah. And I love that when she finally decides to attack him at the end, there's like very intentionally placed elements where, first of all, uses the crossbow against him, uses his own weapon against him, which, just before we move on from that, just love that you don't actually see her manage to cock the crossbow. You just see him like pick up the cat, and you're like, oh no, we're going to have to watch him kill this cat. Yeah. And then he's just suddenly, you're like, yes. but then follow that up with she attacks his senses, shoots him in the eyes with the raid, and then uses the smoke detector, which, you know, she hasn't been thinking aggressively. That's kind of an interesting thing about it, is the smoke detector has been there the whole time.
Yeah.
And if she were in a aggressive mode, it might have occurred to her way earlier, like, hey, I have the ability to kind of level the playing field. If I'm using this, I can't hear, but then he can't hear either. And then and like that might, it's not totally leveling the playing field because he still has a weapon, but it removes one of his advantages over me.
Yeah.
Doesn't occur to her though. But then at the end it does occur to her, and when that occurs to her, she attacks not only his hearing but also his vision. I just kind of like that. It's like the disadvantage she has is in senses. She attacks his senses. I thought that was cool.
Yeah, and she, when she stabs him, the final blow with the corkscrew, she stabs him in the throat, basically removing his ability to speak. So at the end of the movie, he cannot hear and he cannot speak, just like so she quite literally levels the playing field in that regard. Yeah, very, very well done. I agree with that. And I think, again, this is all stuff that's just like perfectly set up and pays off perfectly. I really liked, you know, speaking of like one of the central images of this movie, I think one of them is the white mask, but the other is the writing on the door. And I honestly had forgotten that that's a 2-beat in the film, right? It's we do it the first time, and then she does it. She writes in lipstick the first time, and like we said, this is her kind of totally acquiescing to him, just like, please leave me alone. I didn't see you. Like, if you just leave, I won't tell. It'll be fine. Just go. And then the second one is her writing in her own blood, mind you. He says, "I'm coming in," and she writes, "Do it, coward." And it's like, that is like the perfect just visual demonstration of character change, right? Like, and it's not like what he wanted in this whole thing is he was going to scare her to the point where she wished for death, and then he would come in. And in that moment, what she's saying there is not, do it, come in because I'm ready to die. It's, do it, come in because I'm ready to fucking fight you. And that's what the coward beat of that, again, in her own blood. And it's so perfect. Like, she will not be cowed. She will not relent. Like, you might still win. You might still kill her, but it's not going to go the way you thought it was. And it's just great. It's just really great. I also love, you were talking about like that moment where she decides to be aggressive and attack, and she starts with the crossbow bolt. I love that the thing that happens right after that is she gets her hand totally fucked up, right?
Yeah.
That awful scene we've already referenced. So it's not like the movie has the switch flip where the second she decides to be aggressive, she just starts winning and keeps winning through the end of the movie. That's not how it works. Like, she's still fighting this man who has advantages on her, and gets beat up more. She gets her fingers horribly maimed.
Yeah.
She almost gets stabbed on the shoulder. She gets, I mean, she gets fucked up, man. She's almost dying by the end of this movie just from blood loss.
Yeah, shot through the probably nicked an artery or something, at least a vein. Yeah. No, that was the hand, like the wrist probably broken. Just yeah. It's extremely distracting. I'm seeing it in my mind now.
You're seeing the fingers like pointing the wrong way.
Yeah. I mean, but I think it's satisfying though that he gets pretty messed up too. You know, she stabs him in the leg. He fights. He gets shot in the chest. So that's pretty satisfying. Also, I found the bottle opener in the throat to be extremely just delightful. I love this spurt. You know, that was great. It's great.
Very earned spurt. I agree.
Yeah.
I agree with you. One of the things I did want to talk about is, like, we've talked a lot about how I think the story of this movie is very, very solid and sharp and works structurally sound. I think this is one of those movies, and I don't know if you'll agree with me or not, but I think this is one of those movies that, like, maybe you sit down to write and you're like, oh, this is gonna be easy. We got one room. We got two characters, essentially 4, but basically 2 characters, one location, 2 characters, one night. This thing is going to be so easy to make. It's going to be cheap and easy. And then like you think about it for maybe a couple more minutes after that, and you're like, wait a minute. No, it won't. It's actually going to be really hard because from like even from like a script perspective, like what is the script to this movie, right? Like there is dialogue in this movie. There's very little dialogue.
Mhm.
The majority of this movie is just action. And so if you're writing a script and you're trying to script out the story of this movie, either you make a script that's like 3 pages long, or you actually try to like write out the action in like Maddie does this and then the man does this, and you try to like script out what the action is, which movies don't typically do, right? Like movie scripts typically they'll have a little bit of action that like most necessary, but sometimes there'll be like a big fight sequence and then it'll just be like they fight and then they'll move
Mhm.
on to the next beat. And so you have to like if you're writing the script for this movie, you're trying to like script out the action beats. Well, then you like get to your location and to film, you're like, wait a minute, none of what we wrote in here is going to work in this room that
Mhm.
we wrote it in. So we've got to completely rewrite it. And then like that's suddenly rewriting the entire script. Like, I mean, they get like the basically what the beginning and end, but I just have the sneaking suspicion, and I actually didn't get to watch the director's commentary for this one. Unfortunately, I ran out of time because I was out of town this weekend. But I just have a feeling this is a movie that was deceptively difficult to actually shoot, to actually make this movie. I really have like I really feel like this was really hard actually.
I mean, I wouldn't be surprised to learn that Flanagan, this is Flanagan's house, because like, or just a house he was familiar with is what I should say. Because like stuff like, okay, she exits through the top floor, dormer attic window and and climbs along the edge of the roof, and then he comes up the trellis.
Mhm.
It's like, okay, well, you need a house that has all those things.
Yeah,
or,
yeah.
or or even something as simple as she has her back to the bathroom window and he comes in through the back bathroom window. It's like, well, relatively few houses that I can think of have ground floor bathrooms with a window large enough to crawl in,
Mhm.
right? So like these are, I just thought of two things that are kind of tricky to find, right? So that's why I say I wouldn't be surprised if he almost wrote the script around the house that already existed. Because I
Mhm.
agree, like if that's not the case, that sounds really hard. Yes,
Yeah.
yes.
So I looked this up actually. It was not
Okay,
their house.
okay.
And what we're talking about is exactly the problem that
Uh-huh.
apparently like um Kate and Mike like drew this up together, right? They wrote this movie together. They came up with
Mhm,
the concept together, they wrote the movie together, and apparently they would act out the scenes in their home.
mhm.
And that's how they kind of wrote it. It's like, okay, we're in this scene, what do we do? And they would act out the sequences and they would write it down. And then they got to the house that they were filming in and did exactly like shit. None of this
Uh-huh.
is gonna work. So they had to significantly alter the script during filming, which is difficult. They also I'm reading here like Flanagan wanted to do something like where he would follow around Maddie, Kate Siegel's character, with steady cam and a boom mic to make it feel like more dynamic that he was able to follow her around. But apparently, all the audio in those scenes was really bad because like you have
Mhm.
a boom mic following someone around, you can just imagine every step
Yeah,
like is picked up by the boom mic, and just like it sounds. It's not Wikipedia is saying it sounded like a herd of elephants.
yeah. You
Um,
you get the camera person and the mic person.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. And so like they had to redo a lot of the sound. They had to do like a lot of the sound and stuff had to be ADR'd. I read that Kate Siegel's breathing, which she does quite a lot in this movie, is all ADR'd. Every moment in the movie that she takes a
Mm,
breath, that's her in a studio breathing into a microphone and being placed over it. So
mm,
yeah, tough stuff. Like we've talked about the story, but we haven't really talked about like the experience of watching this movie is essentially watching sounds for the most part. It's
uh-huh.
watching not entirely silence. Like we Flanagan kind of jumps in and out of Maddie's point of view and the outside point of view where we get to hear sounds and things like that, but no dialogue. And I think this is really fascinating because We talked last week about how like one of our most tried and true Flanaganisms is the talkiness of his script, is the monologues he likes to put his characters on, and it's really great that he's like, okay, well, I'm going to challenge myself
Uh-huh.
and not do that. And
Yeah.
like he's not the first writer that's done that. Like I think one of the most well known cases is the writer showrunner Joss Whedon, who did Buffy. Also very well known for his dialogue, like his like the Whedonisms of his characters was like one of the things he was most well known for. And in season 4 of Buffy, he said, "I'm going to do an episode where nobody can talk because I'm going to challenge myself." And that's essentially what this is, right? It's Flanagan, like maybe he's most comfortable in writing dialogue scenes. He's most comfortable in explaining theme through dialogue, which I think is true. I think he does that quite a bit in his stories. But now we're going to have to do something else, and we're going to have to, and so that opens up another whole nother bit of problems, right? It's like I want to still make this movie about something, but how do I convey that stuff? How do
Mhm.
I, and you have to learn to use all the other tricks in your tool belt outside of dialogue to do that.
Yeah.
It's, and I think it works.
Yeah. I mean, I think we establish all these ideas through the situation and the background details of the character and how those details causing us to ask questions and think along certain lines rather than being told that information. And I think what it does is it does force him to be more efficient with the dialogue he does use, because
Yeah.
there are a few dialogue scenes, and I feel like those are just absolutely packed with all of the subtext that you then need to
Yeah. Yeah.
understand everything else that's going to happen.
Yeah. Every line has to do like 6 things instead of just doing one thing or 2 things like a normal dialogue scene would. Yeah, I agree with you. I think perhaps the exception to that for me is, and I wanted to talk to you about kind of uh, do you think would this movie have been better if it like fully committed to the bit, with the idea of, we're going to make a movie with essentially no dialogue? Do you think the movie would have worked better if like it was truly no dialogue, like no music, essentially no sound, and we're like really going to dive into this? Because the one thing I was thinking about, and it's not that I didn't like it, but we're going through the movie. We have in the first act we have the scene with Sarah, is a dialogue scene. Then we have the call with her sister Max, that is a dialogue scene establishing things, and then we essentially leave that behind with the exception of the couple words the man says to her. But then like at the very, maybe we'll call it like end of act 2 is when John, the neighbor
Mm.
boyfriend, shows up, and we have this extended sequence of dialogue between John and the man. Um and I did feel like that kind of stuck out to me because it a little bit breaks the flow of the movie, because we are essentially for the most part entirely locked into Maddie's point of view for basically the whole movie. And then we leave her behind when we go to the scene. We kind of uncouple from her. We leave her in the bathroom. She's patched up her leg. She's desperately trying to get the crossbow to load. We leave her behind to do this extended sequence between John and the man. What was your thought on that? Like, did that kind of break the rules of the movie for you in a way that hurt it, or what did you think about it?
No, um, I feel like that's a slasher trope. Actually, the idea of like the neighbor comes, or the cops come, or somebody comes from the outside, and then we have to uh, either they're killed, or they have to, I'm thinking about Dick Halloran in the movie is an example of someone comes to help and is killed.
In The
uh,
Shining, just so we, yeah,
in
yeah.
The Shining, yeah. There's, and then I think Panic Room is one I keep thinking of. I think is it's just kind of, it's got a lot of superficial similarities, but the cops come and she talks the cops into leaving, because her kid is under threat, right? So like the idea of a sort of mid movie, someone comes in from outside and introduces a new variable. I think that's so. Anyway, that didn't feel amiss to me because that just felt like a trope that is appropriate in this context. I think
Mhm.
like I'm sort of taking your question in a more broad direction where it's like, would this have been could this have been done in a way where, for example, you have that first sequence where the sounds are all turned up and you hear the crack of the eggs and the crackle
Oh,
of the
yeah.
food as she puts it into the oven, and it's all
So good.
sharp, and it's causing you to kind of realize like, oh wow, yeah, the world of sound is so rich, and then it just turns down and down, and then it's silent, and you're like, oh wow, and now it's gone, and all of that like context about what's happening around me is gone. That sucks. What if that had just continued for the whole movie, right? It's sort of directionally what you're asking. And I feel like it would have been interesting. I think it would have been more gimmicky and less just like strictly functional.
Mm-hmm.
Like, we're sort of imagining a totally different movie at this point, actually,
Yeah.
I guess is what I would say. Like, I can imagine it working, but it would require quite a lot of changes. And also, I think just like we would have a hard time engaging with it fully if it's literally just like you're watching a movie that's on mute. I don't know. It sounds really, really challenging. It's interesting to think about for sure, though. What do you think?
I agree with you. I mean, I think ultimately that's not the movie that this movie wanted to be or
Yeah.
should have been. I mean, I do think like I am kind of broadly interested in as an experiment of like how into this conceit can we go and
Mhm.
still make a movie that functions, like
Yeah.
uh, ultimately I think maybe the answer is like you just wouldn't have been able to like and no one like I just imagine going to Netflix with this finished product and being like, all right, so there's sound in the first 10 seconds and then never again.
Yeah. We saved a lot of money.
They're like, what? Nobody wants to watch that. And I think it's true broadly that like the majority of people probably wouldn't want to watch that. I'm weird, and I think that would be great. They did, by the way, make something they called it the shush cut of this
Mhm.
movie that was in black and white and basically takes out all of the score. I think it still like has the dialogue and sound as it was in the original cut, but it just like minimizes and mutes the score to make it, I think, do what you're talking about, where like the sounds in that you're so, I forgot to talk about that opening part where the sounds like he just clearly mixed those sounds so high and so
Mhm.
like it's wonderful. But I think maybe the result of that is it does a little bit more of that. Um, but I didn't get a chance to see the shush cut. I think I will go back and watch it after this. I'm a little curious about
Mm.
what it looks like, but um, yeah, I mean, I
Interesting.
think ultimately like sometimes gimmicks are great and fun, but at the end of the day, you want to make a movie that functions as a
Yeah.
movie. Um, I do like I agree with you from the trope perspective of the John scene. I do kind of even in the movie that we're in, like it's not that I have a problem with breaking the convention, the rules of the film so far, which has been locked into Maddie's point of view. But talking like as you did about how the dialogue up until that point was like there's so little of it and so much of it has to do so much stuff, and I really feel like that scene doesn't function in the same way. Like you said, these two people die that we care deeply about, and like I agree on the Sarah front. I don't know how much I like
I
I don't know how much I care about our boy John. I mean, I appreciate that he like even after being stabbed in the neck, he like is still not gonna let this guy fucking get away with it.
Mhm.
Appreciate that portion of him, but I don't know how much that sequence. Okay, so here, as I'm saying, as I'm talking, I'm refuting my own points because what that scene does is allow us to see John Gallagher Jr.'s the man in, I think, the exact light we're supposed to.
Mhm. Yeah, it shows more of his character, especially with respect to like a larger, more dominant man, right? Because up till now he's been the physically dominant one in the situation, and it's like
Hmm.
now he's getting all cagey, and I mean it actually. It's funny. We talked about how he's an idiot. I think we were being slightly tongue in cheek. I don't think he's like an idiot. He's just overconfident. But that's actually a scene where he's not overconfident because he
Yeah.
he plays his hand perfectly, right? Like even dropping the earring, which cues the character John on that like something is badly off. It's like, well, he's playing it so cool that he manages to ride the line of, yes, he has perked up the guy's suspicions, but he has kept just on the side of triggering an aggressive response until he's able to get the drop on him with the knife. And it's a near thing too, because the guy has the rock in his hand when that happens.
Yeah, it's all Maddie's fault. She hadn't distracted him.
Exactly.
I actually read a review that said that's why the movie was bad, is because she did something stupid, like just like distract him. I was like, she didn't know what's going on. She runs up to a window and sees her neighbor. It's like, oh my God, you're here. That's the bad guy right there.
Right.
Yeah.
She didn't know that he was that he was onto him and was about to ambush him.
Yeah. No, I agree with you. I mean, I think that's so correct because, his confidence is a key part of his character, and I think it does demonstrate that his confidence with Maddie is only gained by like it's an artificial confidence, right? It's a confidence because I have set things up. I only do this, and I only go after people that I know I have this advantage on, and so it's like this shitty confidence, and then the second someone else shows up that's bigger than me, we see him as kind of the squirrely guy he is. Like he tries to play it off as part of his act, but like, no, I'm just a deputy and barely, and like he's he's doing not a great job with it. Like John is super suspicious even before he sees the earring. The earring is just kind of what pushes him over. But yeah, I like the sequence a whole lot. I like Michael Trucco, who plays John. I just think it doesn't, like, the dialogue isn't quite as charged and packed as the earlier scenes, because it doesn't have to do as much, I guess, is the reason.
Yeah. Well, I think what it is to me is it's kind of a little game of cat and mouse in microcosm. It's like we take a break from our movie long game of cat and mouse, and we introduce a new mouse, basically.
Yeah.
And we play that out quickly. Like, I think so I think a lot about like managing pacing and stakes in a movie like this. And there's a risk, even though it's a relatively short movie, 80-ish, whatever it is, minutes, there's a risk that like after a certain amount of time, the feeling of threat becomes monotonous and you just get bored. Yeah. You're just like, okay, either he's going to kill her or he's not. You can't, like, we can't keep it. It can't be the same thing. It can't be the same. We need a break. And I think that's why this genre has these like sort of tropes that are like the pattern interrupt of some kind, where what it like functionally, what it's doing is it's breaking your, the tonal and stakes focus away from what you were thinking about. And now suddenly we're worried about this guy, and the stakes are different. And also in a sense, the stakes are greater because this guy can die and does die. Whereas if you're trope savvy, you kind of don't believe that the final girl is going to die. So and then we go back, then you do kill the guy, you do kill him. We raise the sense of our antagonist as a threat because he was able to do this. And then we get back on the track and everything is kind of recalibrated. I think like that's, so when I say functional, like that to me is how it's functional.
Yeah.
I mean, it's fun. It's fun to think. Like I'm still kind of hung up on your challenge of like, how could this movie have looked with no talking? It's like, it's fun to think about that. But
yeah,
I think it would have been really, really hard to pull off.
Yeah, no, I agree. And I like what you said about this being a break in everything. And I just can't get over the fact that it is just this perfect moment of characterization for the man. The thing that popped into my head while you were talking was he calls him, like, when he says the guy that ran by him and bumped into him that he's making up, he was like, he was a big guy like you, like a linebacker type. And it's like, people don't like talk like that normally. Like that to me is this guy. It's just this really perfect view into the psyche of this guy who is sizing up everyone around him, right? Like if you see, like, if I'm talking to a guy that's like more muscular than me, like, I'm not just be like, oh yeah, like you get you big tough linebacker guys, yeah. And it's like, no, you're clearly like sensitive about, like, I think his sensitive and insecurity towards his size is kind of poking through in those moments, and that I think is really good kind of subtextual character work that just helped define him, and you wouldn't have been able to get that without this sequence. So I think you're onto something in every form about the scene. So thank you.
Yeah, I like that. I also just like the fact that like he's sizing the guy up because he's thinking, I'm going to have to kill this guy in the next 15 seconds. So I'm very aware of his size. But yeah, I think you're right. He would have been aware of that guy's size regardless, because that he has he has ego problems.
Yep.
Um,
Yep. It's okay. He gets stabbed in the throat by a corkscrew.
it is okay. Yeah.
I did want to talk to you about the sequence in which the first sequence of violence in the movie, which is Maddie is cleaning up her kitchen with her burnt and horribly cooked food, which, by the way, I know we're supposed to believe this meal wasn't good because we see her like try the sauce and it's not good. That shit looked delicious, man. That asparagus looked so good. That rack of lamb looked delicious. And maybe she messed up the sauce, but I was really a little brokenhearted for the amazing meal that could have been because I got a little hungry. I did.
Can we? Yeah. Sorry. I know you were on your way to making a point, but like, can we talk about like the subtext of like she lives on her own and she's trying to make this incredibly elaborate meal.
Yeah.
Number one, as you say, indicated that she is failing at it. Number two, it's all going to be for her.
Mm-hmm.
Like, isn't that interesting? Like,
yes.
She's not making top ramen. She's
making rack of lamb
for herself. Like that's just interesting to me as a character beat.
Oh, perfectly said. Yeah, no, I completely agree with that. That this is again how we're using subtext to characterize that. Like, yeah, like what type of person would do that? Who there's a person that is both on their own and also like very. I don't want to say this the wrong way, but like is trying to demonstrate and convince themselves that they are self-sufficient, like that I can do this. I can do this. This is mine. Yeah. I can do this. I can make myself elaborate meals. I can have all these things. I can do it. No problem. Yeah, you're right. It's not as if she's having a meal like I'm going to have my neighbors over for the evening. And so I'm making no, this is like, when's the last time you made like a elaborate meal for yourself? Because I know if my wife and kids are gone and it's just me in the house, I'm going to have like a bowl of cereal or like I'm going to make myself a good old cheese sandwich.
It's not never, Scott, but it's not often.
Yeah, I mean, if I'm going to do something that we'll call cooking, it's going to be like pasta or like ramen. I think is a like I'm gonna throw some spaghetti in a pot and get some meat sauce or something. Yeah.
Well, the closest thing to me is when I decide I'm gonna have a steak, which is a thing that hits me, and then I'm like, well, if I'm gonna have steak, I better have like some asparagus or something, and that's about the limit of it. It's like, yeah, that's your meal. There you go. You know.
I mean, even if that's more extravagant than I would do for myself. I probably need to treat myself better. This is my takeaway from this movie.
Sometimes you just want a nice steak, you know, that's all. But this, like, it's not like that's the thing is, it's not like there's no reason for her to be doing this, right? It's not a special occasion as far as is it a special occasion because she quote unquote finished her book? She
didn't finish her book.
She didn't finish her book.
She's got 7 endings and she can't pick the right one.
Yeah.
She says ending stuff, yada yada yada. The end.
This makes perfect sense. She's procrastinating on writing by cooking. That's what she's doing. I get it now. Okay. Yeah.
Yeah, she's completely stuck on the book, and then her friend invites her. She's procrastinating on writing by solo cooking herself a meal, and her friend invites her over for drinks, and she says, "No, can't. Gotta write," and then doesn't actually do that.
Yeah, clearly is not actually writing. Yeah.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Perfect.
It's good stuff. What was I saying before we got on this?
So you started talking about the cooking yourself, cooking a meal.
Yeah. So, okay, I got it. So what I wanted to talk about was the moment of the initial violence where Maddie is cleaning up the remains of this meal that she ruined. And that is when Sarah comes rushing to the door, screaming, is stabbed and killed right in front of her. I like I said, I look around and see what people thought of this movie. And one of the complaints I saw often was there's no way she wouldn't have noticed that person being murdered, like out of your periphery, whatever, even just like feeling the vibrations of the door or just like 10,000 other things. And I'm like, okay, maybe, but isn't it in a world of this is a movie and every thing that happens in a movie is by design and intentional. Isn't it interesting that this movie about this woman who has isolated herself from everyone around her, who has this friend reaching out, this friend that's incredibly kind, incredibly nice to her, nice enough to her to attempt to learn sign language just to be able to communicate better with her. Isn't it saying something that this person is desperately reaching out to her in her moment of dire need, and Maddie does not notice,
Mhm.
cannot see, cannot hear, of course, but does not notice, is not there, is so isolated and segmented and separated from everything that even when the people around her need help, she doesn't notice it. Like, that is so much more interesting to me than just being like, hey, she said, didn't she not have peripheral vision either? Can she see what? Come
It,
on.
First of all, I obviously agree with you. Like thematically, it's like, yeah, the point. Look, that's what the movie's doing. It's not. This isn't a simulation. This is a movie. It's a story. But then the other thing is like, look, like the way that we do glass in movies is because like you have to set up the lights and where the cameras are very
Yeah.
carefully to not get the glare, which you would actually get. Like
Mhm.
if I were to go look out my like kitchen window right now, which is the window that, you know, the equivalent window that someone would run up to screaming and pounding on, I can't see out of it at night. I just see glare from the
Yeah,
indoor lights, and that's
true.
what she would be seeing in real life. So it's one of those things where it's like, look, this is not a real complaint. I'm sorry. Um,
I
yeah.
also saw this great IMDb trivia thing that was like, um, Maddie clearly doesn't know how cars work because a car could perfectly drive on floor flat tires. I was like, what?
Oh my
Stop,
god.
stop watching movies. Oh, there was
Yeah.
another one that was like, she didn't need to go outside the door to get her car alarm to go off because if you put your car remote to your chin, your head turns into an antenna and it would perfectly allow.
Yeah,
Just like,
plot hole.
I'm just like, what are we doing? Why do we
It,
watch things?
it's funny that like this particularly stuff in like the genre where it's like person being stalked and they have to problem solve. For some reason that just activates people's like, oh, this movie is bad because I thought of something that the character didn't. And
I,
it's
I
like
do
that
find
just,
that really interesting because I,
yeah.
I totally agree with you. And it's not, look, I'll be the first to say that I am guilty of this just as much as some of these people I'm making fun of. Now, I've never like gone on IMDb and written a thing about it because I have more important things to do. But I like there are moments where you watch movies like this where you are, as you said, you are kind of playing the role of the victim and also like playing the Monday morning quarterback,
Mhm.
of like, why didn't she just do this? Why didn't she just do this? Why didn't she like, you are kind of playing that role. And I think a good movie doesn't necessarily have to like explain away every scenario that you, the viewer, can think of in your head in the moment. I think all it has to do, and I think people lose sight of this sometimes, is make you understand why this character in this moment did this particular thing, right?
Right.
um eh, and like, ultimately I think these complaints are silly and stupid because I think everything that happens to Maddie in this movie makes complete sense. I think everything that she like, this is a woman like, we see her as resourceful and clever. We see her as every single time that she gets pushed up against a wall, she like comes up with a plan to get out of it. But we also see every single time those attempts backfire.
Mhm.
And so like she's kind of like, there is what he's trying to do to her, because the point like, let's be clear here, he could kick the glass door down literally whenever he wants to.
Yeah.
Like, he says it, but let's just reinforce it. Everything he's doing in this movie until the very end is just to fuck with her.
Mhm.
That's it. That's it. And so her reaction to this at differing levels is just trying to feel out this impossible scenario in which this guy clearly has the advantage over me. And so like, we see her fail, we see her struggle, and I just like, I don't I don't really hold any attention to the idea of like, these characters acted stupidly. I think they acted according to what the best guess they had at the time. Um like, someone comes to your door and threatens to kill you, are you just going to immediately be like, oh, I need to um, think of this complicated
Yeah.
like,
Well, yeah. I mean, to me, that's just a mindset where it's like you're just not thinking about this as like an actual situation. You're
yeah.
imagining like you're refusing to empathize with the character and the
Hmm.
drama of the situation. If like yeah, all you have to do is just think of the last time like for a second you heard a sound you couldn't account for, and you were like, somebody in somebody upstairs, and
Yeah.
like you didn't immediately think of the smartest possible way of dealing with that. I
Yeah.
bet I bet that you were kind of unsure of how to respond actually, and maybe a little scared and spooked. I don't know. I'm it's silly.
I ultimately, like, yeah, I'm mad that we're even spending time on this because I think it is stupid and silly. I just am kind of fascinated by the fact that horror broadly, and this genre of horror more specifically, breeds this kind of reaction more than just about anything I've ever seen.
Hmm.
Um, I think it is one of the old standards, and honestly, I think, and I'll take this back to what actually matters for what we're doing here, is I do think Flanagan's attempt to kind of, we talked about the very beginning of the show, which is like set things up enough to where you the viewer can kind of draw the cause and effect chain from A to Z. Allow maybe is one method of attacking that kind of incessant tendency in the audience to you know backseat drive the
Hmm.
movie. Because
Yeah.
if you're allowing them, if you're like throwing them a bone in that regard, maybe they're not thinking quite about enough about the things that they would have done. They're instead focusing on, oh, this is clearly paying off in this, and
Yeah. Yeah. Guiding your attention, right? Like guiding your
yeah.
attention to the smoke alarm,
Hmm.
which I think it's funny 'cause in context of this conversation, but like part of me would have been frustrated if the movie ended without using the smoke alarm because you're just
Sure.
like, it was right there, it was obvious, idiot, stupid. But no, I mean we do use it because it was set up well, but I can at least imagine someone feeling like, well, why didn't you do this obvious thing? I think
Hmm.
it's the scene where she kind of talks to herself in her writer brain. I think does some work there where it's like her sketching out to herself verbally, we tried this, it didn't work, what about this, no, that wouldn't work for this reason, like laying the playing field very explicitly so that you buy, like, basically so that you buy like why does it come about that she has this change of heart and now she has to be aggressive. It's like, well, she realizes that's the only remaining option, so.
Hmm. Yeah. And I really like that as like to kind of trying to get back to an overarching metaphor of like a metaphor for like picking the ending, right? Like this is the thing that she has is she wrote this first book, and we'll talk about Midnight Mass in just a minute, but she wrote this first book. I guess the book's doing well. It seems like people really like it.
Mhm.
And we know from our future knowledge that the story in it is just really, really fucking good. We know this because we've
Mhm.
watched it. Um, but she's struggling to have a second book, and part of that is because she can't pick an ending. Is this writer brain of hers allows her to see all possible endings, and she can't decide which ending is the best. And I do love that moment at the end where she picks the she kind of eliminates all the endings and gets down to the only one that works. And I think that is demonstrative of like what writing is like sometimes, like you're stuck. We'll call it writer's block, call it whatever, is you have all these possible things, none of them quite feel right, and then eventually you're just going down the list and kind of, that won't work because X, that won't work because Y, and you eventually get down to, this is, Stephen King talks about it a lot. Like he talked, no spoilers, but he talked about this with the end of the Dark Tower, is like, this was the way it was going to end, this was the only way it could possibly end, this was it, right? And that sometimes feels like how a writer gets to an ending, and that's a process that doesn't quite always make sense. It's not like you can't just kind of brute force your way through it. Sometimes it just has to happen, and I think that is what occurs to her over the course of this movie. And she ultimately wrote an end to the book. Matt, the end of her book is 5'9", tattoo on neck, white man, died fighting. That's
Yeah.
how the book's gonna end.
Yeah, finished. Yeah. I was so sorry if this is a stupid question, but like the book that she had already published was Midnight Mass, right?
Correct.
The
Yes.
book she's writing now is we don't know.
The follow-up to it. Yes.
Or do we like we see the pages in a few places? Are we supposed to, or is there supposed to be some subtle reference there? Like
I like poured through some freeze frames to try
Hmm.
to see if I could pick anything up of it, but no, not
Okay.
not to my knowledge. I only know if we see a title of it.
Okay.
But I mean, let's talk about the Midnight Mass of it all though, because
Yeah.
we have by the way, we have two characters that appear in the television show Midnight Mass sitting there talking about Midnight Mass,
Mhm.
which is just perfect.
Yeah.
And like we don't see a lot of this, Matt, but the one part of the scene is when Sarah is talking to Maddie about Midnight Mass. She says, "Oh, I loved Riley and I loved Aaron. Th- those are the characters from it's actually Midnight Mass." So like
Yeah.
just for those that don't know, Midnight Mass is a 9 episode, I think, series that Mike Flanagan creates, writes, and produces, that came out in Netflix in 22. I can't remember. I think it was right after the pandemic, so maybe 21. Um, and this is something he always said that he had been working on a very, very long time. I think this is perfect evidence of this. Here's 2016. This book that is called Midnight Mass is not just like, oh, I used the name of the thing I was working on in the background. It's the story. Like I
Yeah.
think there's shots of, I think the back cover that you can see that the island that it takes place on is spelled slightly differently, but like it's the story Midnight Mass. Like
Yeah.
that's what it is. And I think that's really neat. It's very Stephen King
Yeah.
of Flanagan.
I was totally going to make the Dark Tower reference where it's just like, yeah, this is a level of the tower where, yeah, we got some Charlie the Choo Choo stuff, and people who don't know Dark Tower will be totally confused about what we're talking about. But yeah, just like the intertextuality and the idea of these stories existing in other worlds and
Yeah.
potentially Mike Flanagan channeling. Which beam is Mike channeling? Is it? I don't. I don't remember the Beam Guardians right now. Aslan,
Well, it
there.
would just
Right.
confuse the non-Dark Tower people. Go, hey, y'all, hey, friends,
Yeah,
go read Stephen King's The Dark Tower, please.
yeah.
Do yourself a favor.
If you want to understand the film Hush, you gotta read Stephen King's The Dark Tower.
Yep.
We got this falls into the Dark Tower reading order, right?
There you go. Yep, it's definitely there.
The Gunslinger, and then
Hush
from a Buick 8, obviously.
Okay, yeah.
And then Low Men in Yellow Coats, and then you got to watch Hush.
Then Midnight Mass.
Yeah.
And then and only then can you read the second Dark Tower novel.
Yep. Then watch the film Master and Commander with Russell Crowe.
Of course, yeah. Matt, I gotta say the part of the Midnight Mass thing that I really wanted to do, and I think the rules of our show and what we set forth here means I can't do it, but I really wanted to use what I know about the story and theming of Midnight Mass, the television show that we will watch here in a year, I think.
Yeah.
And use that to talk specifically about what that could possibly reflect in the character of Maddie, because she's the one that wrote this story.
Mm-hmm.
But I can't really do that. Maybe we can return to that in 2026.
I'm sure we'll remember we said this.
You know what? I promise I won't forget.
Okay.
I'll make that promise to you and to everyone right now.
Our listeners can remind us.
Yeah, that's what I meant by I will remember. All right. Anything else you wanted to say about Hush?
I think that was a good all around discussion.
Yeah, I agree. A very enjoyable movie. I don't know, like I thought briefly about us doing like a stupid ranking thing of ranking these movies we watched so far, and I tossed that idea away like the second I had it. But I don't know if I think I still would probably enjoyed Oculus overall more than I enjoyed this movie. But that doesn't take anything away from what this movie is at all, I don't think.
Yeah.
I think it's a really great film.
I probably agree with you, but I think that's just because of the type of movie. I again just like that's okay. It's fine.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I do want to say really quickly that recently a 4K version of this film came out on 4K HD disc, and apparently the transfer was supervised by Mike Flanagan himself. I bought it immediately, and so the watch of this film I did was in 4K, and it's like really good.
Mhm.
It's like a really really good, like the movie looks phenomenal. It does have the shush cut included in there. It has
Mm.
many there were like 4 different commentaries, Matt. There's like commentaries with Kate and with Mike, and then commentaries with some of the other and I was like kind of overwhelmed by choice, and that's why I didn't initially watch the commentary, and then I just ran out of time. It's a really great collection. So if you watch this movie for the show and were like, I really like this movie, the collector's edition 4K is really great. Heartily recommend it. It's great.
Awesome. That's cool. I am really curious about this shush cut. Like that's just a fun idea.
Mhm.
I hope you do watch it and you can report back.
Yeah, I'll probably. I wish. I feel like it's irresponsible of me to have not done that before this recording. But life got in the way. But I will.
Yeah,
I will circle back around. There'll be plenty of attempts for us to circle back around to other movies as we move forward with this.
sounds good.
Is there anything you want to talk about? Like one of the things I just want to make sure we do is this is our third film. 3 makes a pattern, right? Um, is there anything we're noticing overall in some? I mean, outside of style, but like thematically, the types of stories Flanagan likes to write. I did notice, and I've never thought about this before, but like he really loves telling stories about women.
Mhm.
I've noticed across these 3 movies. Like, it's not that there are not men in these films, there are, but like they usually center on female characters and
Yeah.
the stuff that they're going through.
Yeah, well, it's female characters sort of being victimized by a dangerous and malevolent force of some kind. In 2
Yeah,
cases, it's supernatural, but in this one, it's not.
just
Um,
men.
yeah, it, it's it's funny. I never thought of the creature in absentia as having a gender. I saw some people referring to it as he, and I was like, I didn't see it as a he. Interestingly, but
Yeah,
doesn't that
interesting.
does
I mean, I don't. It's like a weird bug creature,
yeah,
but
right.
I always definitely in my head it was he, the
Hmm,
weird bug creature.
interesting.
Definitely put him in his OK Cupid profile.
Okay, yeah, I always saw it as a she actually. So
That's fascinating. Maybe I don't know.
um, I don't know. I don't know why. Maybe it's because I always have Shelob at the edge of my consciousness, as you know.
Mhm.
This is sort of a spider living in a tunnel. Another Lord of the Rings reference for you.
You did it. You
I
did
did
it.
it. Did
Drop
it.
the confetti, everyone.
Yep.
We did it again.
That's 1. Count it. Um, uh, yeah. So there's also a mild trope awareness. I think we already talked about this a little bit, where the
Mhm.
characters are sort of the story itself and the characters to a degree. It's not like the characters know they're in a story, but they are sort of responding, I think, a little bit more intelligently than maybe your typical protagonist of that genre, where they're
Mhm.
and that doesn't necessarily mean they're going to win. Is the other thing where it's like
Sure.
normally, I think interestingly, trope awareness is usually coupled with like, and then we're just going to kind of like dissect this genre, and the protagonists are just going to shit all over everything. It's like, no, that's not what happens here. The protagonists very often don't win just because they're you know a little bit smarter than the average bear.
Sure.
Um,
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know. It seems a little broad to say also like, oh yeah, well he likes thematically rich stories. That's a pattern.
Sure. Sure. Yeah.
So
Yeah. I mean, I think there are some other ones, but I just wanted to kind of keep this in mind as we go through. As like the more data points we get, I think the more conclusions we can kind of draw overarching on
mhm,
like what stories do we like to tell here? What themes do we like to explore? What is the Flanagan style? I think just thematically, I think is or not thematically, just like cinematically, I think is
mhm,
also important too. I noticed
mhm.
this was the second movie in a row where he did the kind of tilt the camera to make up and down become left and right, or left and right to become up and down, because it happens in Oculus during the infamous um, go down on his wife scene. I don't know
Uh,
why I phrased it like that to make it weird, but it also happens in this movie when Kate Siegel's Maddie is trying to pull the crossbow.
mm,
The camera just kind of flips.
mm,
Uh, so that's just a small thing I noticed, but
mm. Yeah, yeah. I'll stand to pay more attention to those things. I mean, I think of the cinematic flourishes as being like never so stylistic that they draw attention to themselves, but also like yes, definitely there are stylistic things happening.
mhm,
Which I don't know. I like that personally. Like that's kind of the sweet spot for me, where it's like
yeah,
it's not just purely functional, but it's not drawing so much attention to itself that you kind of are taken out of the story.
sure,
It always kind of hits the perfect bullseye for me personally.
hmm, yeah, I agree. One more thing I want to say, like I think I knew this, but I didn't realize it as much as it is true, is that Mike Flanagan edits every single one of the movies he directs as well. I didn't know this. Like, I definitely have seen him as listed as editor for some of the things, but like,
Hmm.
I noticed in this movie he was listed as the editor, and I was like, oh, he edited this one. And then I looked back at Oculus, I was like, oh yeah, that one, and Gerald's Game, and like, and it's every single one. Every movie. I'm not sure about like the television shows. I know he definitely edits some of them, but I don't know if he's like the editor. And I'm not talking about the way in which a director works closely with an editor, which is always true. Like the director is always heavily involved in the edit, but I mean like literally is like the named listed editor, like the guy on the team that is. I don't know why I'm miming like
Snip
cutting
snip.
reels together. Like that's not how we edit anymore. But he is the one actually doing the editing, which I think is pretty cool. And I don't know. I don't think it's entirely unheard of, but like not typical. Like, we talk about auteur theory and we like give a lot of credits to these writer directors, but like someone writing, directing, and editing, that's uh, obviously movies and television is like a team effort. It's a hugely collaborative process, but that's a big chunk of it Mike is doing,
Yeah,
not entirely on his own, but on his own.
yeah. Well, a lot of the decisions that are to be made are being made directly by him. Yes.
Yeah, yeah.
I mean,
I
it's funny that we didn't know that, right? Because we've remarked before on our various deconstructing directors series that it's always much harder for us to break down and really understand a director who is not also the writer, because
mhm,
it's like, well, we don't know if we don't know if this spoke to him or if he just had to do this movie or what exactly. But in every case, this is a movie that Flanagan wrote and then directed, and then he chose exactly how to use the footage to tell the story. And I
yeah.
think it's a lot more comprehensive of a view of the artist.
Yeah, no, for sure. I can't wait to see it in television, because one thing I didn't check is going through like each individual TV episode and all these things and seeing, did he only edit the ones he directed? Did he edit like I'm very curious about that. So
Hmm.
all right. That is Hush. That is our third film down, Matt. Next week, we're going to take on the second of the three 2016 movies that were released. We're going to be talking about Before I Wake, as we mentioned last week, originally titled Somnia and then changed. This is a complicated one, Matt. I actually have not seen this film yet. This will be a first watch for me. I am aware of it, though. And I think out of these five films that we're covering here, before we get into Gerald's Game, I think this is probably one of the ones that's the most divisive in Flanagan's early work. There's a lot of stories about this movie, both in the creation of it and eventual release of it, and then the critical and consumer reaction to it. So I think it's going to be an interesting conversation. We'll see. I mean, we're both going in kind of dark on this one, so we'll see how we feel about it.
Okay. Well, I'm excited for an interesting conversation one way or the other.
Yeah, me too. Me too. All right. Before we end the show, though, it's discussion question time, Matt. Let's answer some questions. Now, the people listening to this now are going to hear discussion questions, answers to the question we posed 2 weeks ago on our very first episode on Absentia. So, remind everyone what that question was, Matt.
The question from 2 weeks ago was, without spoiling any future events, what do you enjoy about Mike Flanagan's work?
Can we just, I think, kind of define briefly the rules of how we handle this? Because we typically like to grab some examples and read them out loud. Obviously, we got lots of questions. We're not going to spend 2 hours reading everyone's response out. So we have kind of picked randomly. How many are we trying to do, Matt? Maybe
We didn't quite fully make up our mind. I shot for roughly 5.
Okay, yeah.
Which is just because I think we used to do 10. That's kind of a lot, honestly. We'll see. We haven't quite settled on what our policy is going to be for this show. We'll feel our way into it.
All that to be said, if you're new to the show and didn't get selected, like please don't take that personally. We still do read every single one of them, and part of these questions is for us to kind of have some audience interaction with you guys week to week. But I think also part of the is to get discussion going amongst you all as well. So we hope that it does that no matter what. It seems to have done that over on the subreddit at least. So yeah, let's do it, Matt.
All right. So first answer, in answer to that question from Pierre Jane, I love so much about Mike Flanagan, but I'm going to give a big. Sorry, my eyes are not what they used to be. I'm going to give a big up to his writing and specifically his bravery in using monologues. He said before that the monologues allow his actors to showcase their incredible talent, and he says that with pride in their skill. To echo Matt, the pushback against Flanagan's monologues is a perfect illustration of how characters in movies don't talk like real people. Why? Because real people talk in monologues. Audition monologues are anywhere from 30 to 90 seconds in length. If you've ever been in a real conversation with anyone today, you've probably spoken for 30 seconds straight, maybe even 90. So get off the man's back. He's literally writing the way people talk, only better. It's and then Pear Jane says, P.S. The last comment on the Absentia Kickstarter was, "Now get famous, Mike, so I can sell my autographed script on eBay." And he did. So ever since I read this comment, Pear Jane, I've been realizing how often just in daily life I talk for like 5 minutes straight, and I'm thinking, wow, this would make a terrible movie.
Nope, it's just like I especially editing this podcast, I see how you and I literally like essentially monologue at each other. Like I'm trying to cut together the video, and I'm like, is this a part where we're talking back and forth? So I should do the wide of us talking back and forth. And like 90% of the time, it's like, no, I talk for 2 minutes. Matt talks for 2 minutes. Like, and it just kind of goes back and forth like that. So
Yeah.
I agree with that sentiment. I think people tend to, people talk a lot. We talk a lot. I talk a lot. But I think this is actually just how people talk. I think that's true.
Yeah.
I also love that Kickstarter comment. I I have to say, this is how fucked up I am. In reading the Absentia Kickstarter, there was a part of me that was like, man, I wish I had got to be on the ground floor of this so that I could say I had an autographed script or DVD or something from this movie. It's like, what is that? What is that? What is that desire of mine? Where does that come from?
Just, I think it's natural to want to wish you were part of something that it's like you conceivably could have had a chance at being part of, you know?
I guess
conceivably, you know?
Yeah. Next we have Matt Olaf, who says, the thing I love most about Flanagan's work is the same thing I love about Stephen King. The characters. You understand the perspective of each of the characters in each of his projects, even if you don't align with their views. I also love the sheer horror of it all. He knows how to embrace the darkness, and he does it well. The monologues are great, too.
Yeah. I'm thinking of some moments in Midnight Mass, some moments in this movie we just watched, some moments in Absentia. You just go down the list. Yeah, he's really good at capturing that and really kind of shocking you with it.
I think one thing that I've noticed that's really interesting is we have a lot of Stephen King fans that listen to us because of our Stephen King podcast. And the number of people that have either said they're not following along with us in this Flanagan's Wake journey because they don't like horror movies, or people that are following along but are like terrified of horror movies, I find really fascinating
Uh-huh.
because I totally understand, because Stephen King, while being, colloquially the master of horror, writes about a lot of different other things. And I also think just reading horror and seeing horror are very different things. But I just think it's interesting because I would also say, like, one of the things I love about Stephen King, on top of the characters, as Olaf says here, is his sheer horror of it all. He knows how to embrace the darkness, and he does it well. That's something that I would say about Stephen King as well. But it's just the way people react to Flanagan's brand of horror is just so different.
Yeah.
And it's really fascinating.
Yeah, well, he's really good at it, and thus it's effective, and thus you're like, I don't know if I want to be that scared right now.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And it's visual, that too. All right, Lottie99 says, I think what I enjoy most is the levels of message and meaning beyond simply being scary in Flanagan's work. Each of his works unpacks a complex aspect of the human experience, and I'm really excited to dive deeper into them as we move on. And then they add more after watching Oculus. The use of flashbacks / split timelines to address childhood and generational trauma and the complexity of perception of the supernatural elements, questioning whether spirits are real or imagined, are also things I love in his work.
That's a great answer. Yeah.
Yeah, I think we
I
were
mean,
just talking about, yeah.
I think we just talked about that in Hush, right? Like, this, another director could have been a simple movie, but we have to add meaning to it. We have to have message to it. It's more than just this thriller. Yeah.
Exactly.
All right, we have Alan the Alien 93, who says, this doesn't fall under all of his works, but I love his attention to detail in the background of his shots. He does a great job with his sets and really sets the tone through visual nonverbal cues. There's one show of his that'll keep a surprise for those who don't know, where there are a lot of hidden discrete things shown. It adds to the horror, especially when it's noticed. I know what you're talking about, and one day Matt will too.
Yay. Yeah, that's true. I think that's probably something, I mean, it's probably been true of the movies we've talked about so far, but my understanding is that becomes more and more true with time.
Mm-hmm.
All right, Apocalypse Win 7 says, I was really shocked with Absentia. I wasn't expecting Flanagan's style to come through so clearly right off the bat. While he obviously refines that style in later works, the skeleton is there, and I thought it was a very admirable first effort, especially given the budgetary limitations. It does not look like it was shot for $70K. They then go on to address the question more broadly. I love all the aspects of Flanagan's style that I'm sure others will bring up. Well-developed characters, rich writing, the knack for portraying all sorts of horror, be it supernatural body horror or plain old-fashioned people doing bad stuff to other people. But what I really love most is the fact that he tends to work with the same stable of actors again and again, particularly as he gets into the TV series part of his career. It's a different viewing experience than just seeing one actor playing different roles. It's about seeing how all the actors as an ensemble engage with each other in each new story, like an acting troupe performing different plays. There's a comfort that comes from seeing all the familiar faces, but also an interest in seeing each actor stretch their legs to play a wholly different type of character, time and time again.
Oh, that's a great answer. I really like that.
I love that way of expressing it, because you're like, okay, I know that actor, but what are we going to get from them this time? Like, there's an added degree of excitement about that.
Yeah, and I mean, obviously, like, from the creator's perspective, it's like, well, I love these people. They're my friends and family, and I love working with them. And so getting to bring them back into the team and work again is fun. But yeah, also just like, I know you can do that, and I can close my eyes and see you nail this part and do this thing. And it's like, he does work with other people still. Like, he has his stable his stable of actors, but he gets to work with new people, and he brings new people into the stable. And like, I think it's like, we're not talking about specifics, but Follow the House of Usher is a television series that we're going to be covering a long, long time from now. That's very enjoyable. It includes a lot of the Mike Flanagan actors that you will grow to love over the course of the show, but it also brings some new people in. One being Mark Hamill, who absolutely kills it in his role there. So I love that we kind of get the best of both worlds with Flanagan. We get this solid stable of actors that we both get to see do good work and different work in throughout his stuff, and then we get the occasional bring a new guy in to Flanagan and see what he can do with him. And I think it's great.
I think it's also like there's an understanding of why the concept of a movie star exists. I think where it's like, I want to you do have kind of a parasocial relationship with the movie star, but you want to see what else they can bring, like that.
Mhm.
That's part of the excitement. Like just bringing up Mark Hamill, it's like, oh, I'm already excited to see that because I love Mark Hamill,
Yeah.
like that. That's the parasociality of it.
Yes,
Anyway.
yes. Absolutely true. Man, part of me wishes we could just fast forward to some of these things because I'm so like, but I want to fast forward to some of these things that I absolutely love and talk to you about, but also like there's so many of them, so I can't fast forward to multiple things at the same time.
Yeah.
So we'll just have to be patient and
Yeah.
wait.
It's almost like you scheduled this all out for us in advance so that we could make our way through it in a timely and efficient fashion.
Indeed, that's exactly what I did.
Okay. Yeah.
I'm regretting having to read all these books, though. I just want to get into it. Just kidding. I'm so excited to do the book part with you as well. I think this is gonna be really great.
Yeah, me too.
All right, we have Brambino, 1996, who says the reason I like Mike Flanagan is there's so much heart in each of his projects. Sure, I love horror and all that spooky stuff, but you can tell there's a monumental amount of care and attention put into these projects. He cares about his craft, and that shows. I agree.
Yes, everything he does, it's meticulous, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's a good point.
I think nothing will demonstrate that more when we get to it, but it will be when we cover Ouija. Why can't I say that?
I don't even know. I thought it was Ouija.
Is it Ouija?
Ouija board.
Ouija Origin of Evil, which is a prequel sequel to a not very good horror movie that Mike Flanagan takes, and we'll get to that, Matt. But he does things with it.
I'm excited. Finally, Baby Can You Dig Your Sam says, I love that his works are scary and creepy without relying on gore. I love his characters, and I love that he's got a troupe of actors that clearly love working with him. It's fun to watch their range in a variety of different roles. They say, my husband is not a Mike Flanagan fan, but he is a big fan of Carla Gugino and her Jehoobies. So I can usually get him to watch Mike's work with me.
I mean, who isn't, though, right? Right?
Yeah.
Let's all be honest with ourselves.
That's great.
I love Carla Gugino so much. I can't wait for Gerald's game. Man, it's gonna be fun.
Yep.
I just said I can't wait for literally everything we're covering is literally like just over the past 3 minutes. That's essentially what I said.
I noticed that. Yeah. Well, which I mean, it makes me excited.
I'm having a great time. I hope you folks can tell. We're having a lot of fun with this so far. We hope you guys are too.
Yes, we are.
All right, Matt, what are we doing for the discussion question next week? What are we doing here?
And by next week, of course, you mean in 2 weeks, but please just answer the question as soon as it appears, regardless. Okay, the next discussion question is, what is your favorite use of removing sound?
All right, let's be honest. There's probably a better way I could have phrased that, but essentially we want like this gimmick that Flanagan uses in this movie with this woman being deaf. A lot of movies use sound and the removing of sound and the adding of I think it's just a cool gimmick. I don't know. Is gimmick a bad word?
I don't know. I feel like it's used in a negative way a lot, but also very often it is just the appropriate word where it's like we're changing a thing for effect. So that's.
I don't even think this question has to be specifically around someone who's deaf or can't hear anything. I just think there's like multiple ways that you could pull sound out of a sequence or a movie that do things to it. Right. I have a lot of examples in my head right now.
Right.
That are really cool.
I think, so sometimes you and I go with like a really general question, and then sometimes we go with a question that feels really specific like this one. But the reason we go with it is because both of us instantly think of like 5 examples.
Yeah.
So we assume that y'all will think of far more than what we
Yeah.
have thought of given time. So
Yep. Yep. All right, so that is it, and that's going to do it for the show this week. Next week, as we said, we continue with Mike Flanagan's Before I Wake, one of the only Flanagan things I hadn't seen, so I'm pretty excited for. Matt, let me just. I'm just going to say I'm excited, and then I'm not going to ever say
yeah,
it ever again because it'll be out of my system. I'm excited.
he's a very excited man. Remember, you can reach us via email at flanaganswakepod@gmail.com, on x.com at flanaganswake19, and on reddit.com/r/doofmedia, which is probably the best place to answer those discussion questions and get involved with the ongoing discussions. We also have a Blue Sky account, which is
Flanagan's Wake Pod. We should have been consistent about this, but we weren't. It's Flanagan's Wake Pod.
Flanagan's Wake Pod. So go check that out. And then, of course, at Doof Media on Instagram. Also, don't forget that every episode can be found on video over here on YouTube. So, and if you're watching us on YouTube, then please leave a comment. Let us know what you think so far.
And if you guys want to check out some cool merchandise, you can head on over to doofmedia.myshopify.com, where you can get merch for this show and for every single show we do. There's a lot of fun stuff out there. Our friend Jody helps us manage that and is constantly bringing new things to the table, new merch, new fun ideas. And so please check back constantly for some new fun stuff. It's really great. We have so much fun with it, and it's a lot of really, really great stuff out there.
Yeah, we sure do. Also, if you enjoy our content, you want to support us, then please consider donating to our Patreon account at patreon.com/doofmedia. We got a lot of cool stuff over there on the Patreon, a lot of cool bonus content. So yeah, please check that out.
If you cannot afford to join us on Patreon right now, that is absolutely okay. There's tons of ways to help us out. You can share the podcast, on any of those services. We really appreciate people sharing us and letting people know we're making the show. You can also leave us a rating and a review on whatever platform you support us on. I think Apple Podcasts and Spotify both have reviews. I think they all have reviews now. Some of them are different. Like Spotify's reviews confuse me because I see there's a number, but I don't know if people wrote anything or if they did write. I don't know where it is. Spotify just confuses me sometimes. But please send those ratings and reviews in. That is very important to us right now. And I was desperately trying to vamp while I could get the reviews open.
I'll just say, especially toward the beginning of a show's life, getting ratings and reviews makes a colossal difference.
Mm-hmm.
So, of course, we always appreciate your ratings and reviews. But if you were kind of like waiting and deciding if now was the right time, now is the right time. We would really, really appreciate that. Yes.
Unless your review is 1 star, in which case now is the bad time.
Now is not a good time. Just send us an email.
This week's review comes from Maddie H, who gives us 5 stars. Thank you, Maddie, and says, "The Doof crew are back. From King to Flanagan, listening to Kingslingers for years, and absolutely love how Scott and Matt discuss books and film. I adore the work of Mike Flanagan and can't wait to follow them along this new journey, which hopefully will lead back to the tower." We can all hope about that one. I think it will. Just when is the big question there.
Exactly.
Thank you, Maddie. And seriously, thank you to everyone who has left those ratings. Matt, we've got like a pretty good list of reviews we're going to have to read over the next few weeks. So y'all are doing a great job with that. Please keep it up. Thank you so much. We really do appreciate that. And thanks especially to Maddie this week.
Yeah. Thank you.
All right, folks, that is going to do it for us this week. This was really great. I'm excited for more. We'll see you. We'll see you back here next week for Before I Wake.